How long would Meg's prison sentence be? Ever wondered how Meg Griffin, the perpetually overlooked punching bag of Quahog, would survive if the law finally caught up with her not-so-innocent moments? From mass murder to attempted rape, Meg's been slowly racking up the rap sheet that would make even her dad's jaw drop. I dove deep into the chaotic mess last week, and let's just say, if justice ever knocked on Meg's door, she wouldn't be walking free anytime soon. So, here's a breakdown of how long Meg's prison sentence would be. Number 8. Assaulting a driver. Road to Rupert. While Stewie and Brian are off on their wild adventure to retrieve Rupert, Peter Griffin is up to his usual antics back home. Ever the impulsive man-child, Peter gets his hands on a pair of Evel Knievel gloves, convinced that these gloves will transform him into a baddie. Fueled by his delusions, Peter attempts a series of increasingly reckless stunts. Inevitably, it ends with him crashing his car in spectacular mess that involves not just the vehicle, but 2 others as well. This time, Peter's reckless behavior catches up with him. Joe Swanson, their law-abiding neighbor and local police officer, has had enough. He revokes Peter's driver's license, stripping him of his ability to wreak havoc on the roads of Quahog.
Morning, Peter. I'm here to revoke your driver's license. You piss me off!
Now grounded in every sense of the word, Peter is stuck at home, becoming an unbearable nuisance for Lois. He spends his time pestering her, making demands, and generally being a giant child that he is, to the point where Lois reaches her breaking point. In a bid to restore some sanity to her life, Lois delegates the task of driving around Peter to Meg, their perpetually overlooked daughter that we recently mentioned. Reluctantly, Meg takes on the role of her father's chauffeur. However, this isn't just any old driving duty. It quickly spirals into a nightmare. Peter insists on dragging Meg to all of his favorite haunts with all of his buddies, including drunken escapades at the Drunken Clam, causing endless frustration for Meg.
Hey, Cleveland, who would you rather do?
As Peter and his friends clown around in the backseat, Meg's patience wears thinner by the minute. It all comes to a head when Meg, now seething with rage,
Guys, check this out.
gets into a minor fender bender. The situation escalates when the driver of the other car, rather than simply exchanging insurance information, decides to insult Meg, and this is seen as the last straw.
What the hell is your problem, you dumb bimbo?
Meg snaps. She storms out of the car, confronts the rude driver, and, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, delivers a solid punch that floors the guy. Peter, watching this from the sidelines, is initially shocked, but then quickly transitions into pride.
That was awesome!
For once, his daughter is showing some backbone, and Peter, in his own twisted way, finds himself impressed by Meg's sudden burst of confidence and also aggression. So let's talk about Meg's little rage-fueled meltdown in Colorado, where the episode's big adventure took place. Meg's attack would land her in hot water under third-degree assault laws. Third-degree assault happens when someone knowingly or recklessly causes bodily injury to another person. Given Meg's unfiltered attack, it's safe to say that she fits this bill to the T. Here's what Meg would be facing in the Seminole State. Up to 18 months in the county jail. That's a year and a half to reflect on how slamming people into the pavement isn't the best way to blow off some steam. A nice little fine of up to $5,000, and knowing the Griffins, they'd probably set up a yard sale just to pay this off, and hopefully without selling Stewie's beer again. Number 7. Harboring a criminal. Dial Meg for murder. While Peter is out living his bull riding dreams and nearly getting his face rearranged by an angry bull, Brian picks up a gig writing for teen people. His subject, none other than our favorite disaster-prone teenager, Meg. Brian tails Meg, only to discover that she's sneaking off to the Quahog Adult Correctional Institute for some quality time with her inmate pen pal.
My God! Meg's dating a convict!
That's right, Meg has a soft spot for a criminal. Brian, ever the snitch, rats her out to the family, and naturally the Griffins are horrified and forbid Meg from seeing her pen pal ever again. but Meg, in classic Griffin style, just doesn't listen.
It stops now.
But Mom, I love him!
Her new jailbird BFF escapes, and who does he turn to? Well, Meg, of course. But Peter, being Peter, just smells trouble and he gets Joe on the case. The escapee is swiftly captured, but the damage is already done. Meg was harboring a criminal, and now it's her turn to wear the stripes.
You're under arrest for harboring an escaped convict.
Off to prison she goes as an accessory to the escape, but then she returns home, hardened, meaner, and also ready to give the Griffins a taste of their own medicine. According to the Colorado law, helping an escaped inmate is a serious offense. Harboring a criminal, or what the legal eagles call accessory after the fact, is absolutely no joke. Depending on what the circumstances, this could be classified as a Class 4 felony, and it can land you anywhere from 2 to 6 years in the slammer, with an added 3 years of parole period hanging over your head like a storm cloud. If Meg's actions were seen as aiding a particularly dangerous criminal, then she could be looking at the higher end of the spectrum. Add that to the fact that Meg was knowingly helping her convict buddy, and we've got a recipe for a pretty uncomfortable few years in an orange jumpsuit. Number 6. Flashing Mike, a fistful of Meg. The episode kicks off with Meg Griffin's social status taking another nosedive as she finds herself face to face with the school's new menace, Mike. After witnessing him bully Neil Goldman, Meg unintentionally spills her lunch on him, sparking Mike to challenge her to a fight. The duel is set for Friday, and Meg spirals into panic mode, trying every possible way to avoid the inevitable beatdown. Her first attempt is to transfer schools, but their plan flops, and then she tries to get expelled by causing trouble at the school, but even that doesn't work. Desperation leads her to hire some jocks for some protection, but Mike easily dispatches them.
Oh yeah? Well, you're looking at $1,000 for something like that.
Her friends, sensing the hopelessness of her situation, abandons her, leaving Meg alone and in tears. Enter Quagmire, who stumbles upon Meg in the girls' restroom, feeling a rare pang of empathy, motivated by his own past with bullies. Quagmire offers to help Meg turn the tables on Mike. He coaches her to channel her anger towards her father, Peter, and teaches her how to weaponize her own body in the most unconventional ways.
Meg, in order to get you into fighting shape, I want you to drink this glass of raw eggs.
Come fight day, Mike starts pummeling Meg, but she refuses to back down, using a mix of gross-out tactics like kissing Mike and popping a zit in his face. She gains the upper hand.
Are you?
Ultimately, she seals the victory by flashing Mike, leaving him too disgusted and embarrassed to continue. With Mike defeated, Quagmire offers her a parting nugget of wisdom, predicting a grim fate for Meg, which she brushes off as she basks in her hard-earned moment of triumph.
Meg, I got a feeling you're going to be around for a real long time.
For this victory, Meg could actually get 18 months in jail for indecent exposure and $5,000 as a fine. And if the judge really wanted to drive home the point, then Meg might even end up on some temporary sex offender registries. Number 5. Raped Brian. Barely legal. Meg comes home from school in full teenage angst mode, threatening to commit suicide because she has no date for the junior prom. In a rare act of compassion, Brian steps up to be her date. But of course, he does it with a grumble.
Aww.
After a night of drinking, because who wouldn't need to be intoxicated to get through a night with Meg, Brian drunkenly defends Meg against the high school bully Queen Bee, Connie DeMarco. Yeah, the one and only Connie, by throwing some delightfully cruel shade about her developing body.
You're popular because you developed early and started putting out when you were 12.
This leads to an awkward kiss between Brian and Meg at the end of the night, after which Brian promptly vomits and blames the booze, not the kiss. However, Meg takes this to mean that they're dating, which leads to her getting a little too obsessed about Brian.
Good boy. Who's a good boy, huh? Who's a good boy? Well, we should hook up anyway. I'll bug you later.
When Brian tactfully as possible tells Meg that he's not interested in dating her, Meg takes things a little too far by kidnapping him. She ties him up, drags him to a hotel, and tries to force herself on him. Yes, you heard that right.
Oh, just relax. We're gonna be here for a while.
Thank goodness that Peter and the guys intervene, saving Brian from a fate worse than being stuck in a room with Meg and all of her affections.
I need him!
Meg, I know that's what you think right now, but
To sort Meg out, Quagmire offers to help. Rather than sleeping with her, he gives her a heart-to-heart talk, explaining that she doesn't need a boyfriend to be happy, and gives her a book on how to help with her self-esteem.
Thanks, Mr. Quagmire.
Oh, you don't have to thank me.
He then goes into his bedroom for a little R&R with two hookers, only to be immediately put off by one of them mispronouncing the word whip. Classic Quagmire. So what would happen if Meg's little kidnapping and attempted assault went from cartoon chaos to real-life trouble? Well, first of all, kidnapping is no joke. Under Colorado law, kidnapping is defined as unlawfully taking someone, confining them, and inducing them to go somewhere against their will. If Meg were to be charged with this, she could face up to 12 years in prison, and that's just for the kidnapping part. Now let's talk about the attempted sexual assault angle. Attempting to force someone into sexual activity without their consent is considered sexual assault in Colorado, and the penalties are severe. Meg could face up to 24 years in prison for attempted sexual assault. Given that she was underage at the time, being only 15, she could be treated as a juvenile in some cases. But if it were tried as an adult, then her time behind bars would be significantly longer. Number 4. Framing Bonnie, the hand that rocks the wheelchair. In this wild episode, Lois is asked by Bonnie to check on Joe and Susie while Bonnie visits her father in the hospital. Lois naturally passes the buck and hands the responsibility off to Meg. Surprise, surprise, Meg somehow makes it work, until Joe, in his classic "I'm just doing my job" manner, drops her off right in front of her school. The simple act of decency sends Meg's mind into overdrive, and suddenly she's all about Joe. Like, really all about Joe.
Yeah, that's my boyfriend.
She starts pushing boundaries by calling him by his first name, and when he doesn't correct her, Meg assumes that he's into it. So what does Meg do next? Well, she starts wearing Bonnie's dress, and that is just a classic Meg move.
Oh, here's that juice box you asked for.
Oh, thanks.
Then, in an even more bizarre turn of events, Meg finds out that Bonnie's coming home soon and decides to help things along. How, you may ask? Well, by stealing Joe's gun and running to Maine to plant it in Bonnie's luggage. Yup, you heard that right. She tries to get Bonnie arrested at the airport, like a true crime mastermind. Or, more accurately, a complete mess. Of course, this plan backfires, and things get even weirder when Meg starts talking about having kids with Joe during their dinner. Joe, understandably freaked out, takes his concerns to Lois and Peter, but they brush him off until Lois sees Meg's increasingly uncomfortable obsession with him for herself.
Oh my God, Joe was here. I can feel him. I can smell him.
Finally, Lois tries to bring Meg back down to earth by pointing out that Meg and Joe have absolutely nothing in common, which makes Meg realize that she's, well, just a little off. So, in an act of utter desperation to bond with Joe, Meg throws herself in front of his squad car, hoping to become handicapped just like Joe.
Now we can be together.
Naturally, this ends at the hospital where Joe has a heart-to-heart talk with Meg, setting her straight, and then Meg apologizes to both Joe and also Bonnie. So, let's break down Meg's master plan for a second. She decided that the best way to get rid of Bonnie was by planting Joe's gun in Bonnie's luggage to get her arrested at the airport. Now, you're probably wondering, what kind of sentence would Meg be facing for this little crime spree in real life? Well, first of all, let's talk about the theft of a firearm. Well, Meg stole Joe's gun, which is already a serious offense, and under Colorado law, stealing a firearm could land someone in prison for up to 6 years. Add in conspiracy to commit a crime, since Meg was planning to get Bonnie in trouble by planting the gun, and that could tack on another 3 to 6 years. Now, let's get into the criminal mischief side of all of these things. By planting the gun in Bonnie's luggage, Meg essentially framed her for a crime that she didn't commit, which could carry a felony charge. If convicted of a felony criminal mischief, that means Meg could face up to 3 years in prison, plus possible fines and restitution. And for the attempted kidnapping, since she was trying to control Bonnie's life and mess with her job situation, Meg could be looking at an additional charge, pushing her sentence to anywhere between 10 to 15 years, depending on the severity and the intent of these crimes. Well, who knew that trying to be a homewrecker could actually land you in the slammer? Number 3, killing classmates. Chris and Meg fight the whole school. In this completely chaotic episode, Meg and Chris go to war with the entire school. Like, you're probably imagining some sort of high school drama right now, right?
Oh, Meg, it's a sensitivity mob.
It was just a joke.
They get stopped by a mob in the cafeteria, who are not happy with Brian's tweet, and this is when Meg and Chris realize that it's either do or die for them.
No, Meg, we're eating here.
I mean, this isn't just your typical tussle in the hallway situation. We're talking about a full-scale, all-out school brawl. Now, it's easy to dismiss Meg's anger as she's constantly the butt of every single joke, and let's be real, who wouldn't snap after years of emotional trauma at the hands of high school people? But Chris's story is a little different. He goes from mild-mannered, goofy guy to a full-on school rampaging machine when he gets caught up in all of this Meg drama. The fight escalates quickly, and I mean, it spirals out of control. First, it's just a couple of students, then suddenly it's everyone, and by the time that Meg and Chris are done, it's not just some rivalry. They're throwing punches, chairs, and possibly fatal blows to all of their classmates. Not to mention the casualties along the way, like how Chris knocked out a teacher with a well-placed elbow, or how Meg sends a jock to the ER by hurling a desk like it was a frisbee. It's no wonder that anyone actually walked out of that school alive.
It was a joke.
But hey, that's what happens when you push a family like the Griffins too far. You get a front row seat to absolute chaos, complete with insane amounts of damage and possibly dozens of homicides. The whole school, students and faculty and even the janitor are in danger as Meg and Chris engage in their full-throttled rage fest. By the end of it all, you've got a high school completely trashed, with victims left battered, bruised, and probably traumatized for life. Now, let's talk about what would happen if this wasn't just a cartoon and Meg and Chris really were facing some consequences for their actions. Spoiler alert, Meg would actually be spending a lot of time behind bars for her role in all of this chaos. First up, let's look at the aggravated assault. Meg and Chris were not holding back in their fight. They weren't just fighting for fun. They were seriously injuring people, and in some cases, they could be looking at felony assault charges. Depending on the severity of the injuries to the victims, each felony assault could carry a sentence of 2 to 6 years in prison per victim. Here, Meg has killed over 15 people, which could just mean that she's going behind bars for life. But let's not forget about the potential deaths. While it's clear that the Griffins' antics are often exaggerated for comedic effect, if any of those fights led to fatalities, even if it were by accident, that could easily result in manslaughter charges. Manslaughter charges could vary depending on whether it's voluntary or involuntary, but generally it could lead to over 10 years in prison. Number 2, violating Peter. Dial Meg for murder. In this episode, Meg goes on full-on rebel mode and starts taking revenge from everyone who has used her as a punching bag in the past. So while she harbors a legitimate criminal, disrespects and assaults her entire family, she decides to put all the focus on Peter for a change.
Who's the biggest, toughest guy in this house? My house now, bitch! Now who's the funniest?
While Peter is taking a shower, she enters the washroom and literally violates the hell out of Peter using a loofah. It's probably a little something that she picked up while she was in prison.
Hey,
Meg! What are you doing with that loofah?
don't worry about it.
I should have been worried the whole time!
We can only assume that she actually shoved the loofah up Peter's ass in this episode. And rightfully so. Peter has done her bad all her life, and it's finally payback time. But whatever anyone says, it's still counted as assault, and Colorado laws takes things like this very seriously. And considering how Meg already has a history of assault with Brian, she'll be put behind bars for at least 10 to 15 years. Although Peter didn't seem to mind it, it's still pretty illegal, and a crime like this is not taken lightly. And the worst part was that it was non-consensual, and yet Meg still happened to get away with it. But if Peter does decide to sue Meg, he could actually get millions of dollars off of her. However, he'd probably be the one paying for it since he's her dad. And so, does this really matter? Number 1, murdering people in a wedding dress. Trans fat. In this Family Guy episode, the joke about Meg being involved in murder is part of the show's typical dark humor and absurdity angle. Peter, in his usual cluelessness and also in a nonsensical way, casually mentions that Meg has a wedding dress in the attic, which she allegedly uses for committing murders.
It's actually Meg's. She commits murders in it.
This bizarre and over-the-top statement is just another example of how the show plays with its outlandish dark humor for some comedic effect. Even though it's completely fictional and not to be taken seriously, later in the episode, there's another comedic reference to Meg's supposed murderous tendencies. Peter is at Joe's house, and while they're talking, Bonnie shouts something from inside, prompting Joe to ask Peter, "Is your daughter still murdering people?" Peter responds flatly by saying, "Well, yes, she is." Again, this is meant to be ridiculous and also an offhand remark, amplifying the running gag that Meg has these wild, violent habits for no reason, much to the delight of the audience watching the show. Their humor is absurd, as Family Guy often uses exaggerated and random humor to get a laugh. Now, regarding what the prison sentence would be if Meg were in some alternate universe, held actually accountable for all of these alleged murders, it's clear that this scenario is just a joke. But in the context of the actual criminal law, murder charges can carry incredibly long prison sentences, or even life sentences, depending on the severity of the crimes and also the circumstances. If Meg somehow found herself convicted of these murders, and considering that she's depicted as a minor in the show, Colorado law might classify the charges as juvenile homicide. Sentences for juveniles who commit murder can vary widely. In some cases, the sentences might be life in prison, with the possibility of parole after a certain number of years, typical 40 years or so. However, if the crime were committed as first-degree murder, especially with planning involved, Meg could be looking at an adult sentence, potentially serving life without parole. Although Meg isn't seen committing these murders during these episodes, there's still a running gag that she does kill people just for the fun of it. In total, Meg could face up to 500 to 600 years in prison based on how many people she has actually killed, which no one really knows at this point. So there we have it, guys. Which one of Meg's crimes do you think is the most disturbing? Let us know in the comments. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel for more Family Guy content, and we will catch you on the next one.